Hello, everyone. Let's see if I can fill the room here. This is painful to do because I love seeing everybody out there drinking our alcohol and eating the hors d'oeuvres and talking and making quite a din. But we are about to get ready to get started here. It's really, really lovely to see all of you. I'm Matthew Herper. I'm the editorial director of events here at STAT. Thanks so much for coming out. It's not all over, but it's nice to be able to gather again. So welcome. We've got a great lineup of speakers talking about stories from drug discovery, which we all know can be a very difficult but amazing journey. And throughout, we're going to welcome your questions, both to those folks and to the reporters who will be on stage later. I'd welcome anyone who wants to come. There are booths here. There are chairs. You can fill in back there if you've got like front of lecture hall syndrome, but you don't have to stay in the back of the room. Wow. And I'm going to wait for some folks to fill in. Fantastic. We would we would prefer that you wear masks while you're seated here. We can discuss the merits of the Bangladesh study afterward, but while we're all seated together, it would be better if people could put one on. We have a bunch for you if you'd like one. You can just ask one of the staff. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for coming. That's really all I had. My job here was actually to get you all sitting down. I don't need to say anything else until the content starts. But thanks again to all of you for coming. Thanks to our event sponsor, Catalent. Next, here to kick off this evening's program on behalf of our presenting sponsor, I'd like to welcome Mike Riley, the president of biotherapeutics at Catalent. Mike? He's got the cool Madonna mic, and I don't.
I appreciate that. Okay, there we go. Well, so I'd like to also extend my welcome to everyone here, and also my thanks to the opportunity to participate in this event. I'll just do a brief introduction of myself and of Catalent. So I run the biotherapeutics business for Catalent, and if you're not familiar with the company, what we do, the way I describe Catalent is that we work with innovator companies to help them move from molecule to patient treatment, is basically what we do. And we do that by applying our technologies, our development capabilities, and our manufacturing capabilities and infrastructure. And what I'll tell you is that, from my perspective, the most rewarding part of what we do in our business is that we get to work with some of the most brilliant people in the industry on some of the most advanced science and advanced technology, and we get to work with those folks to develop treatments that can be life-changing, life-sustaining, and life-saving for patients. And having gone through this process of going from molecule to patient treatment over many years with a number of companies, what I've learned and what I can tell you is it can be a very, very rewarding journey, but it can also be extraordinarily challenging and complex. And I think a spotlight was kind of shined on this whole process really over the past couple of years as we responded to the COVID pandemic. And Catalent, we had the opportunity to work with a number of companies developing COVID vaccines and treatments. And the industry developed under very challenging conditions and under a very accelerated timeline vaccines and treatments that have now impacted the lives and saved the lives of potentially millions of people. And that made it very real, I think, for a lot of folks. I think even people outside the industry understand the power of the biotech industry to really change and alter lives. And it also demonstrated what's possible when there's strong collaboration and partnership between various players in the industry. And the only way that we achieved what we could achieve over the past couple of years is because of very good collaboration between industry partners, public sector groups, academia, all coming together with a common purpose to get to where we needed to be in terms of the different treatments and vaccines that we developed. And so what I can tell you is one of the things that's exciting about an event like this is where, from our perspective, we see a massive amount of opportunity staring us in the face. We see huge amounts of new innovation, of new science, of new modalities, new technologies coming out, and all of that creates huge opportunity for new patient treatments. But it also means that there's a lot of challenge and a lot of complexity to actually bring those new technologies to patients and to the market. And so, very much looking forward to the program today. I think we'll hear a lot of different great perspectives of folks that have gone down this path, of people that have ideas about how to improve the process, to go from the lab to the patient. And I think we'll probably get a lot of great insights and great learning. So again, thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate the opportunity to join this great event, and we'll look forward to the program.
Thank you, Mike. I'm not even going to get back up on stage because I just want to get started. But just to ground everybody, what's going to happen here is we've got 4 amazing speakers. And to start us off, they're each going to tell us a story. And so, a story about drug development. And, I would just like to start off by asking you to think back to the beginning of the pandemic, when there was a moment when we were all wondering if anything was going to work against this new virus, which we really didn't know much about. And so I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Diana Brainerd, the Chief Executive Officer of Alavir, but at that point she was working at another company. So, Diana.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here. Thank you. I was trying to figure out, I've got 5 minutes, how to tell this story of remdesivir in 5 minutes, and it's really more of a 5-hour program or 5-day session. But I'll hit some of the highlights, and then we do have some Q&A. I guess the title of this session is Battle Scars, and I think that maybe a theme I would say is that there are many scars from the pandemic and from the development of remdesivir, but I certainly wear them with pride because each scar is a little piece of learning and of progress towards what was ultimately a really tremendous achievement and milestone for patients in the midst of the very earliest part of the pandemic. And I think as an infectious disease physician, as an antiviral drug hunter, and as a leader of hundreds of people who have really dedicated their lives at Gilead to fighting and combating viral diseases, it was such an honor and a privilege to be in a situation where we had a chance to be in the ring in the fight and not be on the sidelines, but be kind of in the midst of things and getting to play a part in trying to alter the trajectory of the pandemic. And the story really starts for me on New Year's Eve 2019, when I'd like to say I was dressed up in a party dress and ready to go out to a great New Year's Eve party, but I was more probably in my PJs making homemade pizza with my kids and wondering when I could really justifiably open up some champagne. And I checked my email, and there was a note that had been forwarded to me from my team from a physician who's done a lot of work in respiratory viruses saying, hey, just heard about 30 cases of mysterious pneumonia of unknown origin in Wuhan. Let's keep an eye on this. And he was someone, he knew that we had just gotten our animal data in with remdesivir showing really remarkable efficacy in animal models of both SARS and MERS, both two coronaviruses. And so clearly he was making that connection, and I made that connection, but really didn't think much of it. I was headed to South Africa the following week to actually teach a course, an MIT winter session course on pandemics, but with a focus on HIV. So off to South Africa I went with that email really being a very vague memory. And then in South Africa, started hearing the news a little bit about what was happening in Wuhan. There was actually a student whose family was from Wuhan. And so there was what was reported in the news, and then there was what she was hearing from her family about what was happening in that city. And it was a very different picture that was being painted, and it sounded really incredibly frightening and devastating in terms of the hospitals being overrun, bodies on the streets, people not understanding what was going on. In the middle of the month, we did learn that this virus was actually a coronavirus, and that really kind of supercharged my team and the folks at Gilead to say, this is a coronavirus. We have evidence that remdesivir's got this great activity against coronaviruses. What are we going to do? And so I came back from South Africa, and we started planning for what we thought might be more like a MERS or a SARS-like experience. And of course, we were totally wrong about that. But I think that's actually one of the key themes, is that there were so many places where what we thought we knew wasn't right, and yet you've got to keep going, and you've got to keep pushing through that, the potential missteps and course correcting. And in drug development, I think that there's a tradition where you go after a disease and you understand that disease. We were trying to develop remdesivir for COVID without really understanding COVID. And one of those pieces in our first protocol that we started in China, fever was an entry criterion, because the first description showed that 95% of patients had fever. But of course now that's laughable. It seems, of course not everyone had fever. You didn't know what you didn't know. But again, we made mistakes, we kept changing, kept adapting. I think the second piece was around, in drug development, you stage gate. You take increasing effort, not just financial effort, but people effort and resources effort, as you move from phase 1 to phase 2, phase 3, and as that evidence of efficacy and safety mounts. What we knew is from the beginning, if this drug works, we're going to have to hit the ground running, and that means we have to be all in from day one. And we were lucky because Dan O'Day, as CEO, had been through the earlier flu pandemic at Roche, and so he knew that there was potential here for this to be a global problem, even when cases were isolated to China. And he got behind this idea of getting all in preparation for success. But it was scary and breathtaking to ask people to abandon the projects they had been working on and come do this thing at risk. We took an entire plant that was dedicated to manufacturing Ambisome and turned it into a remdesivir manufacturing plant before we even knew the drug worked, because we wanted to be able to have that drug ready for patients should it be successful. And it was that type of effort that was a little breathtaking but was needed across the company. I think the third piece that was so atypical and challenging was that we were asking people to work harder than they'd ever worked before, but do it at a time when there was complete chaos, right? People were working in conditions that were entirely different and more challenging, working from home, working in an environment where their personal life was kind of in chaos, where they might have had family or friends or be personally affected by COVID. And, this whole idea of work-life balance, I like to sort of dismiss. There is no balance. It's a verb, not a noun, and it's like you're on one of those things at the gym where you're trying to balance, but you're never balanced. You're just like shifting to one side, then shifting to another side, and trying not to go too far on either side. And that whole paradigm went completely out the window with COVID and what we were asking people to do, working around the clock. And that was extremely challenging. But I think ultimately, having people united around a common vision and a common belief. We're gonna believe in remdesivir. We're gonna believe in the teams that are working on this product. We're gonna trust people to put themselves into a sort of solutions-oriented approach to how to do things that have never been done before, how to run clinical trials when you're getting, overwhelmed with requests and trying to get sites up and running, that typically you say, okay, site activation takes 3 months, we're going to do it in 48 hours. Well, you can't do the normal process, and you've got to trust that the teams are going to figure out how to do that with some high-level parameters in place. And you know, I think if I take any lessons home, what I would say is that ultimately you know, the way to sort of how do you move forward from a once-in-a-lifetime experience? How do you take something that you hope never happens again and may never happen again, and then apply the good things to what you do in the future? And I would say the importance of setting a vision as a leader for where you want people to go and why they're doing the work that they're doing can't be underestimated. The importance of having a great team and how you build that team in the same way you make friends before you need them. You build your team before you really need that team to function cohesively like they've never done before. And then give people something meaningful to make a difference and offer them that chance to be, again, solutions oriented, not on this is how we fit into this box every day, but sort of this is where we need to go. Help us get there in the best way possible. Those are the things that I take with me, and now I'm no longer at Gilead. I'm at a company called Alovir, and we're working on other viral diseases with a cell therapy, something also that's never been done before, multivirus treatments. But again, I think I take those lessons with me of yes, this hasn't been done before, but we can do it. We're helping patients. We're doing things in a new way. There's a lot of education. There may be missteps along the way, but we're all moving towards that same goal, and there's never been a better time to be in antivirals. So I think I'll end it there. Sorry.
Thank you, Diana. Now, this next story is really something different than I think a lot of people are used to in drug development, and one of the more stirring research stories I know. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Leslie Gordon, co-founder and medical director of the Progeria Research Foundation. Leslie.
Hello. It's very nice to be here. It's a different environment for me. And, oh, I'm so glad you put up the slide. This is a slide of children that with progeria, and one of them, just about a little left of center, is our son Sam. And Sam was diagnosed with progeria at the age of 2 in 1998. And progeria is not just a rare disease, but an ultra-rare disease. 1 in 20 million prevalent, so 400 kids in the entire world with this disease. But it's a premature aging disease, and all the kids die of premature atherosclerosis, the kind you see in 70 and 80-year-olds, and at that time at average of their teens. And I'll bet you have heard, especially in ultra-rare, but also in rare diseases, that there's nothing going on, and parents start foundations, and that's what we did. We started a foundation to find the cause, treatment, and cure for children with progeria, not even knowing if it was a genetic disease. That was 1999. So fast forward to now, and 20 years later, we do have our very first drug, FDA drug approved. It's called lonafarnib. And I'm here to tell you about the battle scars in 3 minutes or less of that journey, but also to tell you it was convoluted. I want to tell you that story, but I also want to tell you what that story has done for us and how that story is transforming us and how we're trying to go from here with the next story, because the kids have a new treatment, a great thing, but still that treatment, lonafarnib, is extending their lifespans by as much as hopefully 4 or 5 years, which brings them on average maybe into their early 20s, which is incredible. Even one more day with your child, one more day of healthy life is incredibly important. But there's a long way to go. And we make our mistakes, and we learn from those, and we keep moving forward. Because the only motivation here for everybody involved is these children. And so what was our lonafarnib journey? in a nutshell, it was a little nuts, right? Something where we found the gene mutation in 2003, and by 2007, we had funded enough research to take this drug that was developed for cancer and repurpose it, and run our first clinical trial starting in 2007 at Boston Children's Hospital, bringing the kids in from all over the world. And we're not drug developers. We followed our noses. The drug company, Schering-Plough at the time, and then Merck, wasn't interested in necessarily getting the drug into their pipeline for progeria, and especially when it didn't work for cancer, but they were incredibly generous human beings and supplied that drug for our clinical trials all the way to now. And that's a big deal. And so what we did was what we had to do. We said, what can we do for these kids? After our first trial, we found investigator-initiated trial. We found evidence that the drug worked. But as we went to the FDA and tried to get this approved or tried to get, to keep moving forward, we found we didn't have the primary outcome measure that was acceptable. And so we ended up running serial clinical trials, lonafarnib plus something else, lonafarnib extension, to keep literally just to keep the kids on the lonafarnib and keep understanding what it did for the natural history of disease, plus or minus other medications that we're trying in the clinical trials. And then finally, we had gone to the FDA a few times. It just so happened we just kept publishing and exploring and trying to understand these kids' natural history and what lonafarnib was doing. And we ended up publishing a paper that said this drug extends lifespan. And the FDA was very interested in that. We had to hone it and make sure it was the monotherapy portions. And in 2018, we did that in JAMA. And as luck would have it, so here we are. We just keep getting the drug into the kids, keep enrolling kids, keep bringing them in because we know this is good for them while we work on trying to find other treatments to save them. Round about that time, a small biopharma company called Eiger was interested in this drug and was approaching Merck about it for another indication. And progeria went along with that. This ultra-rare disease went along with the more rare but common indication that they are working on. And Eiger partnered with us and brought this to its FDA approval. So what kind of a drug company would keep a drug going for 12, 13 years, straight in these kids? Well, we did. We were able to do that because of generosity of IRBs and generosity of the drug companies supplying the drug. But we just kind of, whatever we needed to do for the kids, whatever we could do, we did. And it ended up in this really monumental first drug approval. But we always said that we cast a wide net, that is an intelligent wide net of exploring drugs that are going to help these kids. So what do we do now? They're still dying. They still have atherosclerosis, and we want to do more. And I say to parents all the time, we're going to work every day to not only bring you this drug, but to bring you better treatments and to the cure. And so you can imagine, we can't use survival again. We need to find ways to develop new drugs in an environment where it's incredibly hard to have a drug company partner with us, which, we bring menus and we say, we can give you clinical trials, we can recruit kids, we can soup to nuts, we can give you what you need to partner with us to make this successful if the drug is successful. But that's pretty challenging for the drug companies to say yes to in a pipeline, but we are always very interested in that. But in lieu of that, sounds a little nuts, but we are in a position where to do what's best with the kids, we're sort of becoming a drug developer until we can bring a drug, for example, to a place where a drug company might say you're advanced enough, we'll take a risk on this. So for example, we've got an RNA therapeutic that we're developing, looks fantastic, we think, of course, and it's coming along, and I never could have imagined myself or others at PRF in this position, But we're sort of, getting our CROs and getting our teams together, and the people really matter, whomever you bring on, to partner with you in that regard. And we're just moving the drug. We're moving it and looking for partners and moving it a little more, and I'm sure making our mistakes, and it's always going too slow for us. And that's just one example, but we'll keep moving forward because the motivation is the kids. And I can't imagine one day of saying, oh no, we can't do this. Of course we can do it. We will do it. And so we've got our groups together, and we're working on our strategies for moving this drug forward. And interestingly, you said battle scars and your bumps in the road. For example, we're at a moment where we've got this therapeutic, we've got the drug, but we need to infuse it subcutaneously at a volume of 3 milliliters, which these kids with progeria are 3 feet tall and 13 kilograms. They're not going to take a shot, and you and I wouldn't either. Normally, that's that much. And so we're looking to use insulin infusion pumps, subcutaneous, and repurpose those by just putting our medication in and putting that on the kids once a week. And so that's a challenge that we've never gone through before, because we're trying to get this device and reaching out to companies saying, will you give us these devices? So that's the stage we're at right now with just one of the programs. We look at small molecules, we look at the RNA therapeutics, and of course the genetic therapies are, this is a very well-defined single base mutation disease, so they're primed for genetic therapy when we can deliver that, and working on those avenues too. But I would say, I agree with Diana, you see where you need to go, and where you need to go is treatment and cure, and everybody involved, and I think in pharma companies as well, but certainly at the Progeria Research Foundation, we'll just not stop. We'll just make our mistakes, bumps in the road, but we'll keep moving forward until we cure progeria.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Next up, Pat Walters, Chief Data Officer at Relay Therapeutics.
Let me see if I can get that. All right. Oops. This just came off. Oh, great. Okay. Looking for this. Excellent. Technical difficulties out of the way. Good evening. So I wanted to share a story that was really a change in my perspective that came about pretty late in my career, actually. So I'm a computer guy. I head a group right now of about 30 people at Relay Therapeutics that develops computer programs to design drugs and uses those as part of drug discovery teams. So we're pretty far upstream from anything having to do with a patient. And to be honest, when I first got into this game, I didn't think that much about that. I ended up getting my PhD working on applications of artificial intelligence in chemistry. And in 1995, I turned in my dissertation on a Friday. The following Monday, I started working at Vertex Pharmaceuticals as a computational chemist. And I went into the job because there were lots of interesting math problems to work on. And I didn't really think that much about the implications of what I was doing. I still remember early in my career being on a panel with somebody, and the moderator asked, who is the ultimate consumer of what you're producing? And my answer was, it's the chemists and the biologists that I'm working with. They're going to do experiments based on the models that I'm building. And one of the other panelists said the patient. And I was like, wow, that's kind of pretentious. And I, because it's just like, I wasn't really thinking about the impact. And I never really thought that much about the impact until 2012. So I was working across the street at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. And Vertex put Kalydeco on the market. And Kalydeco was the first treatment for cystic fibrosis. And this drug had such a profound impact on the lives of patients that many of them wanted to come to Vertex and see where this drug came from. So Vertex put together a tour for CF patients, and for a while we were doing this every couple of weeks. And we would take them around and we would show them high throughput screening, show them robots moving around. We would take them and show them cell biology, and they could actually see cystic fibrosis transmembrane receptor cells. And then I would get up and do 15 or 20 minutes about computation and how it was used to discover drugs, and I would talk about how we could take the 3D shapes of small molecules, look at the complementarity to the shapes of proteins, and how we could take these sets of billions of molecules that we could potentially make and narrow that down to a small set that we were actually going to make. But to me, the really special part about this was that these people wanted to share their stories. And a lot of them were kids, and there were kids who were pretty much the same age as my kids at the time. And they were generally just so ecstatic, because prior to drugs like the current generation of cystic fibrosis therapies, CF patients build up mucus in their lungs, and they would have to spend an hour or two a day just wearing a vest that would beat on their chest. I mean, imagine that. And I still vividly remember meeting one young man who was not physically active, couldn't play sports because of CF, and he was playing on his high school basketball team, and he was so excited. And his parents, I mean, other than the birth of my children, the look in his parents' eyes, I think, are the one thing that I remember more than anything else. So, these special moments, I think, need to be shared with people in discovery. So, 2016, I left Vertex and helped to start Relay Therapeutics, which is in Kendall Square. And about a year ago, we got the first clinical results for a trial that we're running with RLY 4008, which is a selective inhibitor of FGFR2, running a clinical trial for cholangiocarcinoma. And it was so special to me because we went through and showed waterfall plots and everything, and this looks really great. But then we got to one patient, a 35-year-old man who had an inoperable tumor. His tumor volume was reduced because of our drug to the degree that he could have potentially life-saving therapy. And I looked around the room and especially saw a lot of my junior colleagues with tears in their eyes because they realized the impact of what we do. So I guess that's my message. I'm like this math, computer science guy. And for a lot of years, I didn't think about the fact that everything I do can impact somebody and their family. So, I really, it's an amazing thing to do. Anyway, thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jacqueline Miller from Moderna. Yes, I can say it again. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jacqueline Miller, therapeutic area head for infectious diseases at Moderna.
Well, good evening, everyone. And thanks to Matthew, thanks to STAT for setting up this event, and also for inviting me and allowing me to share a bit of my story with you. So you've actually heard, I think, a lot of common themes from the other speakers. It's actually quite difficult to follow and say something new after them, so thank you very much for that. But maybe I'll tell you a little bit about my story of the COVID-19 Spikevax vaccine development. And I'm going to tell it to you from a somewhat more personal side, because I joined Moderna right about the time that Moderna started those clinical trials. So what is therapeutic area head of infectious diseases? It means I manage vaccine development, and it was a role I had actually had for 20 years working in clinical development, and then the 6 years before I joined Moderna, I was the head of clinical development at one of the larger pharma companies. Moderna had actually been calling me a fair bit prior to the onset of the pandemic. So every month I would get a call, do you want to come build a team and conduct vaccine trials for us? And every month I would say, well, I've done that. I have a great team. We're developing vaccines, and then March 2020 came, and the conversation actually changed completely. So suddenly Moderna really needed somebody who knew how to run clinical trials. And I decided, well, this is a big risk, and I'm not actually given to big risks. I tend to be kind of a conservative person in my personal life, but as I was sitting at my previous company and they were kind of debating and pondering and thinking, what are we going to do? Moderna was ready to go, and I thought, I cannot sit this out. So I made this leap and joined. And I have to say the culture shock for about the first 4 months was breathtaking. It was a pace that I've never experienced vaccine development before. Example, normally the development textbook says you go from phase 1, you reflect on your data, you make some changes to phase 2, conduct phase 2, ponder, maybe think a little bit more, and then go into phase 3. And you know, with the pandemic accelerating at its pace, there really was no time for that. How are we going to do this, but also make sure that the patients who were involved in the trial with this technology that held a lot of promise, but let's face it, had only been in small, make that happen. And the way we were able to do that actually was through a lot of collaborations. I'm a huge believer that there generally is not a solution from one big brain in the room. I think multiple brains always come to a better solution, and this was a case where we came together with the researchers at NIH. We came together with the co-primary investigators. Thank you. Co-primary investigators from the trial, who I got to know very well and now consider really deep friends, got together with collaborators at BARDA who funded our studies. And I'll give you an example of the kind of debating we did. How many subjects is enough subjects exposed to open the floodgates to enroll now 15,000 recipients to this previously untested technology? We actually mapped out very carefully how many subjects we would enroll phase 1, phase 2, reviewed data in chunks throughout, and defined for ourselves periods where, okay, this is enough subjects, now we're going to take the next step. But the oversight of those step-on-step was down to minute detail. And I'll say I spent a lot of sleepless nights, wondering if the decisions we were making and the speed of execution was going to be the right decision. Ultimately, we came to a Data Safety Monitoring Board meeting, and it was November 16th. I'll remember that date for the rest of my life. We had literally just maybe the week before passed this threshold where every day a 9/11 was happening in this country. So I don't know how many of you experienced 9/11 as the defining moment of your life, but up till the pandemic, for me, that was really the most traumatic thing I had been through. And to think that every day we were losing the same number of Americans as 9/11 and no sign of abatement, that was enormously motivating to the team and I to really pull data together. When the DSMB announced, and I was the only company representative in those meetings, so I'm getting pinged from like 1,000 different people. Do you have the answer? Do you have the answer? No, not yet. So finally I had to like basically turn off my cell phone because I just couldn't listen to it anymore. But they announced 94.1%, you're a go, please go as fast as you can. And then you know the end of the story. December 18th, we had our EUA. I just want to share that there were moments through that journey where I really questioned, have I done the right thing? Am I going to regret this? And I can say that, so within about 2 weeks after the product was launched, I had 2 people very close to me. So a former department chair when I was still at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and then also another physician who had saved my life once upon a time. They both texted me and said, you know, Jackie, I'm so proud of you. I got my first Moderna dose today, and I just feel relief. For me, I still actually get a little bit emotional about it. That moment really told me everything was worth it. And as much as I felt a bit haggard at the end of it, I guess the only thing I can add to the other speakers is it actually is worth putting yourself through the ringer to make sure you're making the right decision and always keeping top of mind who you're doing this for. So I'm actually going to conclude there and hand it back to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And now we'll have everybody back up on stage in a moment. But still Mike Riley, President for Biotherapeutics at Catalent, and Darren Carroll, Managing Partner at Polaris Partners, and to moderate, my colleague Nicholas St. Fleur, General Assignment Reporter and Associate Editorial Director of Events at STAT, and a guy with a mic that works.
Yes. Thank you so much, Matt. Great. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mike and Darren, for being here. As you know, the title of this session is Choose Your Partner Wisely, Lessons Learned to Accelerate Product Development. Darren, I'd love to start with you. Tell us a bit, about yourself, but also why is picking the right partner for development and manufacturing, why is that so essential?
Sure. So just very briefly in my background, these days I'm a managing partner at Polaris, which many of you know is about a half a block actually in that direction, and has been investing in the life sciences now for 26 years. Thrilled to be a part of the Polaris team. I've actually, as I like to tell people, I've actually invested with the Polaris team longer than I've invested for the Polaris team, because I've actually only been at Polaris now for a bit under 3 years. And I came here after a 20-some-odd year career with a large pharma company where I spent the last 10 years of my career running the corporate business development group. So I've been able to see these kinds of relationships and these kinds of companies, if you will, from both sides of the table. And one of the things that I like to tell the companies that we invest in today, as a start to this, is to always start with the end in mind. We've actually heard that from a couple people here today, but I'm gonna define the end here just a little bit differently. I like to tell people that the biopharmaceutical industry does 4 things, and only 4 things. It just turns out that each of them is super hard. And it's, you have to discover, develop, make, and sell medicines. Just those 4 things. If you mess one of them up in a very substantial way, then the whole thing falls apart. You actually don't get to deliver those patients, deliver medicines to those patients, if you can't make the medicine properly. Right? So what I like to tell companies at the very start, and this is sort of what I like to say is, 2 scientists and a dog, right? That early start is think about what it will take on the day that you actually get an FDA approval, and you heard that today here earlier, okay, now we have to make this thing in quantities, and now we have to sell it to get it to patients. We've made all these promises to patients, and if we can't make it at scale, and we can't make it in a way that is that enables us to make a reasonable profit for investors, we'll be out of business, right? So that start forces you to think from the earliest moment about how the decisions you make on things like partnerships, manufacturing partnerships in particular, can impact the entire cascade of everything you do, so that years of work can come to a complete stop if you make the wrong decisions along the way and you don't get the right people in the room to help you.
And now, Mike, same question. Why is picking the right partner just so essential?
Yeah, I would just kind of build on some of the comments Darren made. I mean, I think starting with the end in mind, I think is great advice for companies. And I would take it a step further to say, it also can help you both select a partner, and it also defines sort of how you can work with a partner to get the most out of the collaboration. Mm-hmm. I think you want to work with partners that have done it before, that know sort of the whole path from sort of point A to point Z, not just point A to point B. And, what I'd also say is what some of the most successful collaborations that we have are when the company we're working with shares with us what the end is, right? They can share sort of the overall objective that they have as part of a program. And that does a couple things. Number one, you're really leveraging the full expertise and experience of the partner, because sometimes companies will get very, very focused on the short term. It's, how do I get to this next milestone? That, if you're not doing that, you're not sharing the overall context, you might make some decisions early on in development that are not optimal for further stages. And you might not really empower your partner to impart some of that experience that they have that might keep you out of trouble further down the line. I think the other thing that it does is and this is not just talking about some of the specific strategic objectives you have, it's also the patient objectives that you have. So ultimately, what is the treatment you're trying to create, and who are the patients that you're trying to impact? And in our business, what we say a lot is patient first. We really try to keep the patient at the forefront of our mind. And if we have a good understanding of what the patient impact will be of a certain treatment, that really motivates our people, and it really gets everyone on the same team with a combined sense of purpose. So I think that, just to build on the end in mind, I think is a really important aspect.
No, thank you so much for that. And as I was saying, the topic here is choosing your partner wisely. When it comes to, offering advice to biotech startups and such, have you ever chosen a partner unwisely? You don't have to name names. And then what have you learned from those experiences, or what is the advice you would give?
Well, I can talk about an acquisition that I wasn't involved in, but had to try to fix. It was a company that was acquired where the acquirer didn't, frankly, pay quite as much attention to a lot of the FDA feedback on the manufacturing processes, which the questions that the FDA posed weren't really resolved along the way. There was an answer that was given by the company that was developing the medicine, but the answer was never quite up to snuff, and then the acquisition occurred. So the end in mind in that case was, I guess, selling the company. The acquirer, though, kind of woke up one morning and realized that the FDA was going to demand those answers and demand much better answers from the acquirer. And the drug that was actually under development there actually never made it. It had positive phase 3 trials, and it never made it to market because of manufacturability issues, right? It is actually one of the worst examples that I know of, unfortunately. But it's the kind of thing that should give you pause, right? That if you're trying to respond, for example, to financiers like me who are saying, you have money for an A round, and in the A round of financing, you're supposed to achieve these objectives, and then you get a B round, you're supposed to achieve these objectives. If you get too focused on the short term, as Mike has said, and are so focused in on those objectives and forget the fact that all of those objectives need to ladder up to the ability to manufacture a medicine where the data that is in the package for manufacturing has to line up really well, like actually just about perfectly, with the data in the clinical trials. And then when you start to sell it, the ability to know that every lot is going to look like the first lot, right, at a minimum, right, if not better, over a 5, 10, 20-year period in some cases. Thinking about that when you're getting A-round financing can be really hard. And having that conversation with your financiers can be really hard. But having those difficult conversations is actually sort of, as they say, why they pay the big bucks, right?
Wonderful. And Mike, any response to that or any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would just sort of echo the fact that I think where we see sometimes collaborations break down or companies get into trouble is where there's misalignment maybe between the different actors, and so there might be misalignment between an investor expectations, the company expectations, and then what the partner has visibility to or is looking to do. And you find that can lead to companies setting unrealistic expectations where they can't get there, even from point A to point B. But then also that they don't, they miss things along the way, or they make bad decisions along the way. And just use an example. We've seen this where companies will get, particularly the more complex modality, to a point. Okay, well we got a clinical trial set up, we can make the product, but there's like an analytical method or an analytical assay that they haven't developed, and it's a real challenge to develop. I've seen that completely hang up clinical trials, and it can actually mean the life or death of a company, because that can remove the financial runway. Mm-hmm. So it's so important that there's that alignment and that planning and that vision up front, that all the players are aligned in the same objective.
Oh, thank you. And then what would you say are the essential elements to successfully transforming breakthrough scientific ideas, into real treatments?
One thing that we like to talk to people about is making sure that the team you build, particularly in biotech, is as diverse a team as possible, but in particular, and so you get a lot of different points of view, and people who are willing to challenge each other, and that can be hard, and also people who are willing to be challenged, often much harder. But also people who have actually been around the block around 20 times or so, right? Because the complexity in the industry is so great that, and we've heard this here earlier today, right? Just drive and will and passion, in fact, can make an actual medicine, right? And in fact, I don't think you can actually make a medicine without it. But getting to the point of approval is something that usually requires people who've been around for longer, who've seen these processes, right? And can understand where they fail and can help you in the planning and execution as part of that.
And then Mike?
Yeah, I'd echo that I think it's even more important now for companies to tap into the expertise of partners or networks of advisors or whoever, just because drug development is becoming more complex. So, I mean, more and more companies focused on disease states and not necessarily modalities or technologies. So it's not like, we're a small molecule company, we're a monoclonal antibody company. We see more that are going across modality. And there's just really no way, it's not feasible or probably even possible to develop the expertise across all of those things. And so, being able to tap into either partners or individuals that just know the space, that they know, mRNA, they know, viral vector, they know antibody drug conjugate, can make a huge difference and can allow you to maybe shortcut some things and avoid some mistakes that some people can make.
And if you don't mind, if I can follow up one thing on that. Recently I spoke to a company that we were looking to make a potential investment and had a really incredible team, just world-class biologists who had come up with a super exciting, we thought, new platform for discovering new molecules. And it's a company we're actually still quite interested in, so I won't say much more than that.
Sure.
But the leaders of the company had really not questioned some of the most basic assumptions that they jumped to, that what they were going to be approaching these problems that they were trying to solve with was the cell therapy modality, right? Because they were just convinced that was it. They were not cell therapy experts, so they weren't starting from that, but they really had jumped to that conclusion. I asked the question, could you accomplish this same objective with an antibody drug conjugate? Could you accomplish this same objective with a monoclonal antibody? And the answers that came back were, well, actually, yes, we could. And so my question back to them was, well, and nothing against cell therapy, by the way. We invest in this space, right, and we're actually very excited about it. But is that risk one that you want to add to all of the risks inherent in this company? Or can you actually think a little bit more deeply, perhaps bring in some other advisors, to your point, Mike, to help you identify maybe what are the full array of choices that you can make when it comes to modalities, and make those choices on issues like scalability, on manufacturability, on the cost of goods sold, right? Because someday, remember, discover, develop, make, and sell. At some point, when a medicine is approved, you will have to sell it, and if you cannot sell it for more than you cost to make it, you got a problem. Right.
Thank you so much, Darren, Mike. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Matt now, who will continue the conversation.
Okay. All right, and I'd like to welcome our panelists back on stage. Nick, give your mic to Jackie.
I would love to.
Before we start talking and before we start taking your questions, this is an intimate group. This should be more like seeing Shakespeare on the grounds of the Globe than seeing Shakespeare in a modern theater. In other words, if you want a drink, go get a drink while we're talking. It's cool. You're welcome to. Go ahead. The bar's there. The bar's there. No one's going to be mad at you for getting up and going and getting yourself a drink. I'd like to welcome everyone back up on stage. And I'm hoping you all have some questions. But I actually wanted to start with a question for Jackie, which is completely not about the point of your talk, which is something that I think I've heard from several people tonight. Why is it taking so long to get vaccines for preschoolers and toddlers, for the under 5 crowd?
Yeah, and so I'm a pediatrician by training, so I'm going to say something that the residents used to get sick of hearing, which is, I think inherent in the response is that kids are not small adults, so their bodies are changing over time, and they're changing in a lot of different ways. Their immune system is the obvious place where they start quite immature, so a 6-month-old is not even the same as a 3-year-old, so imagine comparing to a 30-year-old. I think the other place where they're really not comparable is just in their overall body structure. So we go through a lot of changes in puberty, obviously, and children actually have a much higher surface area to volume ratio, which means that an injection site reaction that may seem unpleasant but no big deal in an adult actually can be quite different in a kid. So we felt like it was very important to do careful dose ranging, particularly at those youngest age ranges. And we actually not only dose ranged, so started with the lowest dose that we thought would be possible and moved up, and then compared to selected dose. You'll see that we've actually selected quite different doses for younger age groups than adults. But also age de-escalated. So what does that mean? It means you start with the populations closest to adults and then come downward. And that process just took a while to get to. I think, again, there's that inherent tension between, of course, we want preschoolers to be vaccinated and protected against disease, but we also wanted to be sure that with this new technology, we were proceeding in a conscientious manner. So I think that's part of the answer for us, and I think it's also for other manufacturers as well.
And just a related follow-up, the efficacy numbers are a lot lower than what we were seeing when you had that first amazing moment with the DSMB for these kids for 2 doses. They're like 40% is the figure in my head, I think.
Yep, 40 to 50% depending on the age group. So actually,
how are you confident that that's the strains and not a difference in kids not being little adults?
So I am confident, and the reason I'm confident is because if you care to go into the literature, and I mean it's a bit specialist kind of paper, but we actually did investigate with the NIH the relationship between immune responses and protection from disease. And although there's no one threshold identified that really protects you against disease, there is clear correlation between immune responses and your protection against disease. And so when we negotiated with the FDA, the idea that even though we're testing different doses, we will make sure that those doses are statistically comparable to adults. And in fact, FDA even went a step further and asked us to make sure that the geometric mean titer ratio, if we were going to choose a lower dose than 100 micrograms, that geometric mean titer ratio was greater than 1, so that we would not take a back step. And if you look at our reported vaccine efficacy first compared to adolescents, very comparable, 90% in adolescents, 94.1, and that's when the original strain and alpha are circulating. 6 to 11-year-olds, that's when Delta was circulating, and again, 88% efficacy. Same geometric mean titer ratios, by the way, between 1 and 1.2, so really consistent. And then for the children, with Omicron, now in adults, the effectiveness decreases to 44%. So we do think that there's going to be a need also to switch out the strains. Omicron was really a step event in this virus's evolution. And going forward, I think we need to provide the data that we've generated in about 4,500 individuals for various variants of concern vaccines. But it just doesn't make sense to continue to vaccinate against a strain that nowhere in the world is circulating anymore.
Anybody have a question out there? Nick, do you have a mic, or how are we doing this now? You have a little sign that says question. Shout them, I'll repeat them. Anybody got something? Otherwise, I've got plenty, but all right. Well, actually, my first question is I'm wondering if any of you have questions for each other. We just watched all these presentations and you brought different perspectives. I've got some for each of you, but I wonder if any one of you wants to ask one of the other panelists a question. Diana? You sort of look like you're thinking.
Yeah, I would love to ask a question about, like the idea of sort of starting a drug company from a foundation. I know that you're like saying you didn't jump into that role, but now it's happening. And I would just wonder from your perspective, what are the things as you've partnered with different companies and kind of seen the generosity and compassion of individuals, and also probably the bureaucracy of large institutions and the ultimate financial drivers that drive strategic thinking. Like, what's your perspective on kind of if you did jump all in to become your own drug company, like what are the things that you'd want to say, I really want to be like that, and what are the things where you'd say, I'd really like to check that at the door and not bring that into my universe.
Let's do one of each.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think one thing that I hear throughout these talks and other pharma talks that I've been to is in caring about the patients, there's no difference, right? Everybody in this room cares intensely about the patients. There is no question about it. And then all the other stuff sometimes gets in the way, right? The money gets in the way. I wish I could leave the money at the door, but you can't. So you have to figure out ways, right? We're talking ways to make it all work. So I think there's a perception in the world in general that pharma companies don't care about their patients, and that is just not true. And I've experienced a lot of that generosity. But what the challenge is how to make the other parts work, because everybody, even the Progeria Research Foundation, right, we have to keep going too. So we don't operate with investors. So how are we going to fund all of that? And how are we going to make all of that work?
I don't know how to explain it,
And
but the flappy bit.
it would be really great to be able to, for us, the vision of the end is curing the kids, right? But all of that in between, are we going to continue to sort of, okay, what do we do next? No company is interested, and I see why. I would like to discover how to make progeria attractive, really attractive. So even though progeria is a premature aging disease, and the reality is that the cause of progeria being a protein called progerin is made in all of us at about 100-fold decrease, and that means something to cardiovascular disease in all of us, but that's a long-term project. So that's, again, not as attractive. So what I'd like to, say, I scoop up is the care for the patients. What I'd like to leave at the door is these, these challenges of the financing, but I can't. We can't. We have to find a way to make it work. We have to find a way to partner properly to make it work. Does that answer, sort of answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big, Michael J. Fox has a line about that, which is that he's in business to go out of business, right?
Right, we're in business to go out of business. That's great, but one drug can cost you, I don't know how much, right? For a tiny organization. So absolutely.
$200 million is a good round.
Right. We started as a $100,000 organization, moved into fantastic range for us, which is $1 million organization. So, right, we are in business to go out of business. I don't actually think of it that way anymore, because that would mean that somebody else takes over the cure. And right now, I think, well, we just have to find a way to keep getting that cure, whenever that comes, or the next big significant treatment, to the kids all around the world. So I'd like to see us as an organization that has what we need to cure the kids and then finds the pathways to do that for kids all over the world.
Matt, we have some questions.
Okay, great. Your microphone's a little wobbly. Is it wobbly or is it just not picking up?
It's not working.
Oh, okay.
So I don't get a microphone. That's okay.
We're short mics apparently.
So my question for Leslie is, you mentioned that the sort of proximal cause of death in Progeria patients is atherosclerosis. There's a lot of different drivers behind that. There's a lot of drugs that are being developed to target that, like PCSK9 inhibitors. So
Right.
is that something that the people are looking at? Are those drugs effective in Progeria patients? Is there one key driver of atherosclerosis, like LDL or hypertension, that you can look at?
Right, so, okay, so for everybody else who can't hear, the question is, do we look at drugs for atherosclerosis of aging and try to apply those to progeria? I always say that, we're all learning from each other, the different disease processes, even what you're doing with the vaccines at Moderna. We can always pick up something incredibly valuable for progeria and other diseases by listening to each other. Even if just listening to our methodology, how do you go about partnering, but also the basic science and the clinical science too. It's a very good question. We evaluate those things, but atherosclerosis is multifactorial, right? And these kids don't have It's not a lipid-driven disease, it's not a smoking-driven disease, it's not a diet-driven disease, it's a progerin-driven disease. So that segment of atherosclerosis in the rest of us that is driven by this abnormal protein that we produce too, that's the target. End stage, you're absolutely right. If we go end stage or actually down the way a bit and see that the cycle is creating plaques that look just like the plaques in a 70-year-old, we could go at it that way too. So we do evaluate those things.
Matt, we have another question over here. Great, before that. So I've got a dead battery. Do we have a spare? Question over here. Perfect. Go.
So, when this is COVID specific, and I apologize to those who aren't really focused, but when COVID first hit, a few months later, we had these incredibly efficacious vaccines, and it was an incredible technology event. And then when Omicron hit, not Moderna, but another firm said something like, well, if this one's important, we'll have a targeted vaccine out in 100 days. 100 days later, Omicron's been and gone. Is there sort of, you think about the getting to the lab at the patient's bedside, what's it going to take to be able to respond to a disease as fast as Omicron? What needs to change? Technology, regulation, like how do we handle the next pandemic that moves fast?
Yeah, Jackie, why are these things still in clinical trials? When can we get them in our arms?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I were in the business of going out of business too, but for me, January 2021 was like, welcome to 2021. It's no different than 2020. So I completely appreciate the question, and I think, so maybe I'll tell you a little bit about our story going through that and then kind of tell you about the ecosystem. And I think the answer is a little bit in that aspect. By a year into the pandemic, everybody was done. I mean, so like I say, naively, I felt elated. I mean, I think we deserve to feel good about it, but at the same time, I think it was a little bit naive to think that everyone would get vaccinated and everything would disappear. And I think, vaccine hesitancy is one issue where this virus continues to propagate in humans. But even a bigger issue, I think, is despite all of the manufacturing that was done at risk, despite all of the stockpiling that was done, thinking that we would be able to move forward, the reality is it took a while to get people to where we are today, and we still are struggling to reach some corners of the globe. And while all of that was happening, Alpha circulated first, and we've been testing every variant with samples of blood from people that have been vaccinated to say, okay, is this going to neutralize? Is this going to neutralize? And Alpha looked almost exactly like the original strain. Beta was the first time we started to say, maybe this vaccine can acquire mutations that are really important. So we put our first beta containing vaccine in the clinic in, I want to say it was April of 2021. It took regulatory agencies a while to get, and not just regulatory agencies, I think everybody, a while to get behind the idea that we may not have the final solution and we may need to think about this differently. This may not be a problem like the H1N1 pandemic that kind of peaked and came down. We actually vaccinated people well past the peak of that pandemic, and the disease kind of ran its natural course. So we didn't have regulatory guidance about how to do this. Even now, if you look at the different candidates, right, every manufacturer kind of went their own way and made the best decision they could. But I think there wasn't really a clear, unified vision of how are we going to address this. Now, a year later, I think we've gotten to the point where people appreciate, one, this isn't a pandemic that's just going to have a sharp end. It's going to have a tail to it, and we're going to need to figure out how we get back to doing the things we do while managing that tail. And I think now we're in a much better place where you may be aware that FDA just had a Vaccines and Related Biologics Advisory Committee meeting to talk about how are we going to decide if we make a change, and if we make a change, how do we advise manufacturers on what change to make and what data do they need to show us to make us comfortable with that change. So I think there's going to be a follow-up meeting, and hopefully that will bring the clarity. But The other challenge I'll just mention is that the variants were coming so fast and furious, we actually didn't get the product made, the clinical trials spun up, people vaccinated, data tested, analyzed, submitted to the agency in time for yet, before another variant was on its way. So I think that's another solution. We are looking to pool the data from all of the different variants we've shown. And again, it's a little bit like pediatrics, showing the consistency. Safety profile looks like the original vaccine, and we can show that we're improving on those immune responses, where we're seeing reductions from the 1273 serum. So fingers crossed that by fall we have a way forward.
Pat, so I just wanted to ask you, the kind of work you're doing, we've been hearing about for a long time. You guys seem to have actually gotten some traction in speeding up the development of drugs. As we're talking about speed, like where are we in having computational work actually increase speed to market and decrease failure rates?
I think it depends on what we're talking about. I think if we're talking about something like predicting whether a small molecule is going to bind, I think we can do a reasonably good job at that. I think we're improving our ability to predict things like pharmacokinetics. But I think ultimately this comes down to the fact that there's still a lot of biology that we don't understand. And I think this is where we're failing. We're failing when we're going after a mechanism that isn't validated. So I think, in my mind, that's the next challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what have you got out there?
Sure, yeah. Hi, Andrew Colmer, Exit Health. Pleasure to be with you all this evening. I know that from a measurement perspective, infectious diseases and ultra-rare diseases alike, they present a lot of unique measurement challenges. So I'm wondering, just from your perspective, what, if anything, would you like for future trials to be measuring differently, better, more effectively for your study therapeutic?
Ooh, this is a good one to end on, which is good because we have to end. So a quick answer from each of you. We're going to go down the line. One quick answer, don't explain it too much. People can look it up later. Your dream measure in the diseases you're working in that you don't have now. We'll start with Pat.
I think it's really, for me, it's perhaps not the dream measure, but it's making the mechanistic connection to the disease. And I'm a discovery guy. I want to know which targets to go after. You give me a target, I can design an inhibitor. It's just making that connection.
Jackie?
I would say real-time epidemiology, so to the moment, to know where to study, when to get the greatest impact.
See, I thought you were going to say T cells, but that's cooler.
Not T cells.
For me, my dream measure, we've actually developed a progerin protein assay from plasma. So that I would have said is my dream measure, but we've finally accomplished that. What my real dream measure would be is to find something we can measure early, like 2 years old, even earlier, 3 years old, in these kids that is predictive of their development of cardiovascular disease, such that we can change it with a treatment and know that really, really early.
Okay, Diana.
Well, I'm a believer in T cells, working at a virus-specific T cell company, and what I would say is related in terms of the ability to identify patients who are at the highest risk for getting sick, so that you can target your treatments to them. I mean, we do pretty well, but the ability to do even better through some kind of measure, I think would allow us to hone our therapies even to a greater extent.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Or are we done? Because I have
It'll be
all
the
these,
first question for the next session.
I have all these incredible people in the room, experienced people, and I just want to ask one question, maybe just one of you can take a jab at. What do you think would be a key to any company for taking on an ultra-rare disease? What is it that I'm not seeing that could be? Is it an FDA benefit? Is it grants? Or what is it that would be the key to saying yes for a company that doesn't put the company at risk, say? I don't know.
So maybe I'll just say, one of the things that attracted me to Moderna, and I asked a lot of questions, so I clearly talk a lot and asked a lot, was a willingness to invest in Kriegler-Najjar. So Kriegler-Najjar is the work that we're doing to complement some of the work that we're doing with other inborn errors of metabolism, and that is the treatment that's going to be given away. It's something that we're going to do because if we don't do it, no one else will do it. And I mean, unfortunately, I don't think one company can do everything. But I do think that, for me at least, being part of a company that believes in doing well by doing good, that's critical. That's who I am at my core and where I want to work. So
Awesome.
hopefully just finding every company that's going to be willing to take on that cause.
But create an adjacency. I mean, I think that's the thing, right? At Gilead, they were in HIV therapy and have dedicated, so many years and dollars and resources to HIV cure, which, is different from an ultra-rare disease, but extremely, high bar for success and has been going on for decades. And that work is not driven by a profit, but it's driven by a commitment to a disease space. So I think finding a way of making progeria sort of make sense in the context of what a company is already doing, and whether that's other rare diseases or this really long-standing commitment to atherosclerosis, I don't know, but making a part of that and making people feel good about taking that on.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. I hope you guys can maybe keep in touch and talk about that some more. We're going to move into our last session. I'd like to thank all of our panelists here. I'd like to welcome up my colleagues, Adam Feuerstein and Allison DeAngelis, who kindly gave me her mic. Can we have Jackie's mic for, yeah, we'll give somebody's mic. And Adam is bringing me up something here. This is, again, I said, okay, now you're all drinking with us, so go ahead, really. The bar is open.
Yeah,
you can make noise.
This is
I'm
the
going to say
after party.
one thing about the people on this stage, especially this guy.
Can you hear me? Is this thing working?
No, but we're loud. Yeah, yours isn't working.
Is it working? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
This is the after party.
So you can talk in the back. You can make noise. I've been at louder events. So go ahead and mingle if that's what you want to do. People who want to talk to us, come in.
Bottle service starts soon.
Service starts soon.
Just tip well, everyone.
I have a question for Mr. Forrest.
Yeah.
Because
What
you
should I
woke
do
up
with
this morning and something happened.
I'm just going to put this back here.
There was some, yeah, it works. There was some news.
Yeah, you wanted to talk about Biogen. I will say, we'll talk about Biogen in a second, but just to keep within the theme of this meeting, we write a lot about companies like Biogen who are in trouble and bad things happen, and it's Alzheimer's, but I think we always try to keep the patient in mind.
Right.
And so I think it's important that we say that in that, we realize when we write about these things that people are affected by the things that we write, the companies that we write, the diseases that we write, so that particularly when it comes to Alzheimer's, which is obviously a devastating disease with very few effective treatment options. And, for as much as we write about how Aduhelm, there's no evidence that it works, it potentially is not very safe, that for a lot of people it was something of a great hope for a lot of people.
Well, and
so we want to make note of that and acknowledge that. When we do our reporting.
Profoundly want the drugs to work.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, I always think that one of the nice things about our system as it is that even no matter what executives or people who are trying to make money off the system do, you've got this regulatory structure and you've got this scientific structure that when it works, it allows people like the folks we just had on stage to develop drugs for sick kids and people with Alzheimer's and people with cancer.
Hi,
But
Allison.
anyway, completely off topic.
Allison's
from
our new
that.
reporter. She just
Everyone
joined
say
us
hi to Allison.
2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago?
3 weeks?
3 weeks ago.
Week 3?
Yeah.
But can we make Adam
great to have
answer
her.
the Biogen question now?
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
So what did you want? What's the question?
So, I mean, so
I wrote two Biogen stories today.
you did.
Yeah.
How quickly do you? I mean, this is a major sea change. Is this?
Yeah.
Is this the best or the worst job opportunity in biotech right now?
Right. So just for those who may not have been paying attention,
The
you know,
CEO of
there was
Biogen
like
is
some
gone.
other Supreme Court thing happened today, and maybe that caught your eye, and you didn't pay attention to what we were doing. Yeah, Biogen had two like twin pieces of news today. One that they were essentially kind of ending the spending and marketing of Aduhelm, and that CEO Michel Vounatsos was stepping down. They were going to find a replacement for him. Obviously, those two events are related and
Right.
linked. You know, who will be the new CEO of Biogen? I don't know that. I mean, I'd like to know that, and you know, maybe that will be a story for another day that we will report on. But it's a tough job, right? I mean, that's a
Well, but
there's
is it like one of these Fred Hassan opportunities, right?
it's-
Where you
it's one
take
of those,
over
right.
and you become a legend because things were bad and they could only go up?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain extent of like all the bad shit has already happened, so like you can come in and be the hero, and maybe the bar is a little bit lower because you know, compared to him, like you'd look good.
His Twitter bio says he curses, by the way.
But at the same time, it's like who you know. I think you know who wants to take that job is one of the questions, right? So.
And
What's the recovery pathway?
do you have a
for
mic?
Biogen? I have something.
She's got
Okay.
something. These things
I
are
Alright.
really weird. Yeah.
I'm
okay.
Italian American. I can project. Can people hear me?
No,
Okay,
you got.
good.
All right, good.
Yeah, I mean, well, like, what's the recovery pathway right now for
Right.
Biogen?
Yeah.
With new leadership, I know that, like, you know, Stat has written about what the options are for M&A. At this point, we have tofersen that was disappointing. We have Aduhelm that is disappointing as an understatement. I struggle to like kind of figure out what the
Look,
future is.
Michel Vounatsos had a really bad year, and he made $15 million. If someone said to me, "I'll give you $15 million to be the CEO of Biogen," I'd probably take the job. So I mean, like, it's not bad money, right?
Right.
I mean, like you know, and like I said, like you know, you can be the hero. So I think that there will be a lot of people who will want that job. I think it's more a question of, and one thing we wrote today in our second story is looking at the board, because I think the board is really fascinating at Biogen, because the board has been historically very fractious. You know, there's essentially like two camps of the board. They don't see eye to eye. They don't agree on a lot of things, and that's kind of led to a lot of the problems at Biogen because they can't agree. So strategically, they can't really kind of go in a unified direction. That's how Michel Vounatsos got the job as the CEO. He was kind of a compromise candidate. So the question is will the board be able to come together to find somebody that there's a consensus that they want as the CEO? And that we don't know. And that will be interesting. But the board is also starting to change. So
if any of you guys want the job, make sure the board
Yeah,
really
come to
means
me.
it when they say
you want my
that they'll-
recommendation.
that they
I'll
give
write you a letter.
that they'll give
Because
you
Biogen loves me and they'll listen to me.
that they'll really
But
let
yeah,
you
so
run the company.
Two longtime directors of Biogen are leaving the board. There has been speculation and talk about more of the sort of old-time Biogen directors also leaving and bringing new blood into the board. So that will be very interesting to see. I think that will probably happen simultaneously with the search for the CEO. So that will be something that we will be watching.
Any questions out there? Ask us anything. Complain about things we've written. Anybody? No?
They're all at the bar.
Oh, is Nick see anybody?
I've been looking.
You've been looking?
A
Okay.
little shy. They may need another drink. Any other questions?
Ask Allison what she likes about stat.
Well, I was going to ask Allison the thing I said I was going to ask her, which was that I said to think about the drug development process, and
Yeah.
you've been listening and kindly taking notes on some of the stuff that's been said tonight. So, I mean, what stands out for you in terms of, you know, covering this? Like, what is your, I mean, is there a story that you come back to in terms of drug development, in terms of a case where it either really worked or really didn't?
I was thinking about that today and during, the sessions, and we kind of briefly talked about, there's a lot of hype around machine learning and the potential for what it can do in drug development. And we really haven't seen a lot of that kind of come to fruition yet. And of the examples that I've been thinking about of drugs that were shelved and have now been revived, I was thinking about Karuna and the work that, Stephen Paul has been doing with muscarinic receptors, which he worked on way back at Eli Lilly. There's always been this kind of trend of you give it a decade and then we've got new insights and a new perspective around how to overcome toxicity issues, how to, rework, run a clinical trial a little bit of a different way. And I don't know, maybe it's the skeptic in me, I don't hear anything about machine learning yet that makes me think that it is a silver bullet that can, kind of leapfrog over that kind of 10-year retrospective window. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get there at this point.
If a drug invented by a computer fails, what do you do to the computer? You just shut it off?
Have you seen Office Space?
Hit reset?
Like the printer.
Yeah.
Exactly. You take your
it out to
really
the field.
expensive supercomputer
Take it out to the
out
field
back.
and with a
You get a baseball bat.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
There
you go. You
Exactly.
play that in the
I had a really bad computer at a previous job, and there was a moment where they bought everybody new computers and let us take a sledgehammer to the really bad
No
computers.
way.
No.
What stood out to you about, this kind of theme about drug development and how we can kind of overcome odds? And
Well, I mean, stories like Leslie's really stand out to me. I mean, I always remember there's a story about the Cystic Fibrosis Research Foundation, which is a disease charity that has had a real impact, including in Kaleido, and it's complicated, and there's a lot of complicated financial. But one of the coolest stories out of there, I always thought, was the story of hypertonic saline, which is just salt water. And they found that surfers with cystic fibrosis, which apparently there are some in, you will not be surprised to learn, Australia, because where would you let your kid with cystic fibrosis? Australia.
Yeah.
But
it's either that or you
they
go
did,
and talk to those
they did
giant
better.
spiders.
Right, they did better because, they figured out that it was the salt water in the air, and the foundation was able to do a clinical trial. And I just always do think, the cost of conducting clinical trials and the cost of doing them is such a huge impediment for everything we learn in drug development. And how many stories are there like that? How many stories are there like lonafarnib? That because we don't have the clinical trials infrastructure to do the studies, don't get developed. I guess that's the thing I feel like I've been banging my head against the wall for a lot, and people tend to think it's dry and boring. But if it feels like we're making sports cars and not building roads.
Well, I think with the progeria stuff too, I mean, obviously ultra rare, and I think the message was, partly that, you have trouble getting to find pharma companies who want to help you contribute. They're happy to give you the drug, but they don't want to put you in your pipeline. And when I think about ultra rare diseases or even rare diseases, you think gene therapies, and there's been an amazing advancement in the science of gene therapy, but the business side of gene therapy is really struggling. And I worry about, and we've seen, if you pay attention to the stocks, and I do as part of my job, you've seen the gene therapy company stocks prices plummet more than just the biotech stocks, which are also down. But a lot of that is around the struggling to kind of understand the business model and whether, you can do all the great science that you want, but at the end of the day, these companies are for-profit companies. They need to make money, and there's so much uncertainty right now about how these companies will, if and when these companies do bring a gene therapy to market, can they sell them?
Yeah.
How do they get reimbursement? I mean, we're seeing in Europe.
Most valuable, Adam.
What's amazing in Europe is Europe is ahead of us in terms of approving a lot of these gene therapies, but they're being pulled off the market because they can't reach agreement with the countries about pricing, and that's been a big problem and I think a big concern for a lot of people.
to the extent that the next generation gene therapies, like the CRISPR, the gene editing companies, actually are more valuable in terms of stock price than the ones that were actually close to getting products to market. It's
Yeah,
like the
I mean,
whole
well, that's kind of like
generation's
the
been
flavor of
skipped.
that's a little bit of the technology flavor of the day. But at the end, they're going to still face.
Oh, for sure.
They're
I'm
still
just
going to
saying.
face the same issues about,
Yeah.
how do you price it? How do you get reimbursement? Are there enough patients? How do you get it to the patients? And all those issues are still being figured out. And that's something that I worry about when I see, because I don't know, like what.
Use
and I
the
think
mic,
that's probably
Nick.
you're probably facing
Interrupt.
that too. When
Adam, we have 2 questions over here. The first
Ooh.
this thing keeps coming off, so I'm gonna like.
Hello, my name is Katie. Thanks
Hi,
for
Katie.
organizing this. My question was originally for Pat, but I figure I'll ask all of you.
We could ask Pat too.
Well, I'm interested in his perspective as well, but Allison brought up machine learning, so this sparked the thought in me. But there's a lot of scrutiny around data, especially with technology companies, the Silicon Valleys of the world. Do you predict any of that scrutiny coming to healthcare, or do you feel like that's pretty well protected with HIPAA in place?
Oh yeah, it'll come. I mean, I don't
It
think
should
it's.
come.
I don't think it's coming that much to drug development in terms of companies. In terms
But when
of
you say
clinical
scrutiny,
trials.
like define what you mean. Like
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg testifying in front of Congress and how they're using data and how data is the most valuable
Oh, I see.
Well,
commodity in the world right now.
I think that absolutely, I mean, if we're not, I think that we're starting to have that conversation. We actually should be having that conversation more. I mean, look at, some of the investors who have bought into some of the, DNA testing companies and now have access to stores of genetic information. And I mean, on a drug development side, I mean, we do have certain, things that are kind of, like protections in place, but I think that that's a really open question, and we should absolutely be scrutinizing who has access to that patient data.
We have another question right over here.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Joe. Thanks for organizing this. It was a great series of talks and perspectives. I want to return to what you were talking about before, kind of about financing, and we talk about hurdles to drug discovery. One of them, of course, is the science working, and the other is continued excitement to fund work that may lead to successful drugs but could run out of financing. From your unique perspective, kind of serving all of what's going on, different companies, do you see any trends emerging? We saw from 2020 really hot markets for biotech that have since cooled. Do you see any trends, be it between more biology platforms, modality plays, certain technologies, certain disease areas of, everyone's been kind of hit, or, all ships rise and sink on the tide, but
Right.
do you see any unique trends emerging from the types of companies that are doing better? You talked about gene therapy, but going beyond that.
Allison, you look at the venture space a lot.
Yeah. I was just talking to somebody who launched a new firm. One of the guys, he used to be with SVB Leerink, just launched a new fund with KKR. And even he was saying that he's not exactly sure at this point what kind of rights the ship. We always kind of go back to clinical data as being the thing that will kind of like refresh the market, but it hasn't. I mean, mainly because the clinical things that we keep talking about are clinical holds at this point. It's hard to get clinical data when you've got, a slew of clinical holds. Part of me wants to say that we're gonna start, I don't know, like some of these companies that, like some of these like hub and spoke, like big ultra platform companies where investors feel that they can kind of mitigate the risks once they start spinning out data. I wanna say that that might be something that gets investors interested in, but I don't have a clear answer at this point, and I don't think that the private markets have a clear answer either.
I mean, the most successful platform companies in the industry succeeded because they accidentally bought something that turned out to work. But
I tend to like discount people chasing trends. I sort of just look at drugs. Like modality to me is like a funny word. I don't know if that Moderna people are still here, but like Stefan Bancel says modality with that accent, and it sounds cool, but like it doesn't really mean anything to me. you know, it's like at the end of the day, it's like, does your drug work or not? And like, I don't really care. Like, I mean, I'm interested in how it works and the technology and whatever's behind it. But like, at the end of the day, like, you know, we talked about gene therapy. Let's say, for instance, let's take, you know, sickle cell disease or beta thalassemia, which are like, there's lots of gene therapies, there's lots of genome editing companies that are all pursuing those two diseases.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, the patient doesn't really care whether he's getting CRISPR or he's getting a gene therapy. Like, the patient just wants to be cured, right?
Or
like,
a pill or a
like,
shot.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's kind of what is important at the end of the day. Like, the patient doesn't really, I mean, it might be cool to get a CRISPR therapy, but like, as long as it works as good and better than something else. But if something else works better, the patient's going to want that. Like, that's more important to me, the way I think about things, than like what the technology is underlying it.
Question.
Adam, an attendee asked, in your opinion, who do you think are the best CEOs right now of little startups?
Oh, well, you have to wait for the end of the year for
I don't
Adam's
know.
best
Like, it's
CEO.
too early. It's too early in the year to say that.
Well, anyone piquing your fancy? Anyone
I
you
don't
have
know.
your
Like,
eye on?
who do I like? I can't pick favorites.
I'm curious to see what Josh from Loxo does with the new company.
Yeah.
That was a really great first, or a really great previous run.
And I don't write a lot about startups either, so like I kind of, you know, the company. Although, you know, there's too many like preclinical public companies.
I'm crazy impressed
but
by
I kinda-
Dragonfly, not for any reason other than that they seem to be getting huge amounts of cash only through upfront payments.
Yeah, they did that Gilead deal.
300 million's
Yeah.
not chump change, but
I keep coming back to Sekar over at Verve. I just remember
Oh.
I like him.
I've liked him. He was one of my main
like him.
sources when he was in cardiology, and he was
Yeah,
a
he's
great
yeah.
source.
Yeah.
He's good on Twitter.
He couldn't come tonight, but
Yeah, he's good on Twitter.
but
Everybody go on Twitter and tweet at him for not coming tonight.
Sec. Yeah.
Yeah. Just everybody.
Yeah,
don't
where
right
is
now.
don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have one more? We've got time for just one more. If anyone
Wow.
wants to,
Ooh, yeah.
In the
come
front.
on, ask us about the story you hated.
Hi, can you comment on the clinical hold news regarding Vertex's?
Yeah, that was
diabetes
really
cell
weird,
therapy?
wasn't it?
So sad and worrisome.
So when I did talk to Vertex, and they're like right over here, yeah, I did. I talked to David Altshuler and Stu Arbuckle on the day that came out. I think, you know, there's always a little bit of like PR coaching when you talk to those guys, but like I think they were genuinely surprised. I don't think that they, you know, what happens in a lot of those communications, and it is true. Like, you know, you kind of wonder, like, they get this communication with the FDA, and they say in the press release that they don't know, like, but that actually is kind of true. Like, the FDA can be very sort of, I don't want to, obtuse is maybe not the right word, but like sort of opaque about what exactly the problem is. And so I genuinely don't know if Vertex, like, as of Monday, like, really knew why the FDA was concerned about bringing up to the dose, particularly because they had already done it, right, with that third patient. They had already gone to the full, and we're talking about this the stem cell therapy for type 1 diabetes at Vertex as well, which is a very cool, talking about technology, it's like a very cool thing, if it works, obviously. So I don't know, and so like the FDA has gotten like kind of clinical holds
They've gotten clinical holds
crazy.
happy. Yeah.
For a lot of different reasons, though. A lot of it has been like manufacturing, assay development, those sorts of things, which are like the really, I mean, super important, but like technical, deep in the weeds, like very like black boxy type stuff.
Yeah.
It's hard to. But this one was
That wasn't
more
the
like
case,
this
yeah.
one was more like we just don't think that the data that you have warrants going to a full dose. Maybe the FDA saw something and they were a little worried. It's not very clear. I mean, the company, to me, expressed like their confidence that I think that they could turn this around. But
It is easy for the FDA to say stop at least.
It
once.
is. Yeah, it is. And like, you know, the FDA, the companies, like, obviously, companies want to go as fast as they can for all kinds of reasons. And the FDA's job oftentimes is to say, let's tap the brakes, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this analysis, let's collect a little bit more data, and then we're okay. We'll give you the green light, and that might be what happened. But you know, I don't have any real more insight into kind of more than what we reported.
We have
All right.
just one more audience
But
question.
we're at time, Nick.
Oh, one more, Matt.
You want to
please.
take the one more? All right.
Hey guys,
Yeesh.
Adam, I don't hear your thoughts on like immuno-oncology, especially with Nectar and interleukin-2
Yeah.
drug that just failed recently. And what are your thoughts about the whole sort of like space?
So my thoughts on IL-2, the Nectar thing? My immediate thought is like Bristol paid a lot of money for that, and it, and kind of burned a lot of money. I mean, it is interesting, like, and it kind of gives you like a sense of the environment. Like, if you think about that, like I think they paid like over $100 a share
I think so,
for
yeah.
Nectar.
Yeah.
Like, when they bought into the
Yeah.
deal, and they bought into that deal like in 2017 or 18.
Yeah, it was that period. It was
Ooh,
also
this
when
is coming
like
up.
the deals with.
So yeah, so like kind
Insight
of
were
interesting.
happening.
Like they paid so much for it, and then like by the time that the thing failed, Nectar stock was like in the single digits. I mean, it was.
Well,
So,
and no
but at
one-
the same time, it tells you that like even the best companies don't really know, right? Like that at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is kind of a gamble, and. No, I think there are other companies, and I don't know how the details, but there are other companies who are developing like quote unquote better IL-2s, so like better Nectar drugs, and maybe those will work. But it's just kind of like the whole immuno-oncology combination therapy add-on to checkpoint inhibitors, like that's been tough, right? It's like, I mean, we've had some successes, but we've had a lot of disappointments, including that one.
Well, I want you all to have a little more time to mingle, and you can come up to all of us and ask us questions afterward.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that drug doesn't work. That's my
Thanks, Matt.
my deep wisdom. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to see you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys.
See you again when we do this again. Thank you so much.